Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we re-diving into one of the most critical events of the 20th century, the Suez Crisis of 1956. This was a pivotal moment not only for the countries involved, but also for global geopolitics. It's a story of war, diplomacy, and the shifting tides of power in the post-World War II world. So, buckle up because this is a complex and fascinating chapter in history. Let's set the stage. The year is 1956. Egypt, a country in North Africa, is under the leadership of President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser has been in power for a few years, and he is gaining popularity across the Arab world for his nationalistic stance and his desire to modernize Egypt. But Nasser is also becoming increasingly bold on the international stage. One of the first things Nasser does is announce his intention to build the Aswan High Dam, a massive project aimed at boosting Egypt's economy and providing irrigation. But here as the kicker, Nasser goes to both the United States and the United Kingdom for financial help with the project. The US agrees at first, but in July 1956, the UK and the US pull out of the deal. Why? Well, Nasser had been leaning a bit too much toward the Soviet Union, especially during the Cold War, and that made both Washington and London nervous. Now, Nasser's angry. In retaliation, he makes a dramatic move. On July 26, 1956, he announces that he's going to nationalize the Suez Canal. This is a huge deal. The Suez Canal is one of the most important shipping routes in the world. It connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, meaning it's a critical link for oil, trade, and military passage between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Before Nasser's nationalization, the canal had been under British and French control, and both of those countries, particularly Britain, had a huge interest in keeping it open and under their control. With Nasser as nationalization, not only would Egypt control the canal, but he could also cut off access to European nations that relied heavily on it, especially Britain and France. This was seen as a direct challenge to their interests, so what do Britain and France do? Well, they're not going to sit back and let this happen, but here's where it gets interesting. Instead of acting alone, they secretly coordinate with Israel to launch a military intervention. This is where the crisis gets its name. Israel had its own reasons for getting involved. Nasser had been supporting Palestinian guerrillas in their fight against Israel, and Israel saw an opportunity to deal with a threat from their neighbor. So the plan was simple. Israel would invade Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, drawing Egyptian forces into battle. Then, Britain and France would step in, ostensibly to keep the peace and ensure the freedom of the canal. But there is a problem here. They didn't really expect the whole world to be watching, or at least not to react the way they did. Let's talk about that world reaction, because this is where things start to get really complicated. Over in the United States, President Dwight D. Eisenhower is dealing with his own issues in the Cold War. He is also facing the ongoing tensions with the Soviet Union and trying to keep the peace in the Middle East. The US had no interest in seeing Britain and France, both NATO allies, wage war in Egypt. Remember, at this point, the US is trying to contain Soviet influence globally. Now, while Britain, France, and Israel think they can handle this quickly, they completely miscalculate the global political landscape. The United Nations, which was still a relatively new institution at the time, condemns the invasion. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, is supporting Nasser, even though they don't really want to see him succeed. They just want to use this as a way to weaken Western influence in the region. The pressure on Britain, France, and Israel is mounting. The US is pressuring them to cease military operations, threatening to cut off economic aid and diplomatic support. The Soviet Union is making noise, threatening military intervention in defense of Egypt. Suddenly, this localized conflict is a global standoff. So, after just a few weeks of fighting, roughly 10 days, the international pressure becomes too much to bear. Britain and France, realizing they're isolated, agree to a ceasefire. Israel withdraws its forces. And Nasser, while not fully victorious, is seen as a hero in the Arab world, having stood up to Western imperialism. For Egypt, the Suez Crisis is a major propaganda victory. Nasser has managed to secure the canal for Egypt, and his reputation across the Middle East is enhanced. But, and this is key, the crisis also marks the end of Britain and France's influence as world powers. This event fundamentally reshapes the Middle East and, more broadly, the post-World War II order. The Suez Crisis is a turning point where the US and the Soviet Union emerge as the primary superpowers, and Britain and France realize that their imperial influence is quickly fading. After the Suez Crisis, Britain's role in the Middle East is diminished. The United States begins to take a more active role in shaping the region, and Israel, despite its military victory, finds itself increasingly isolated diplomatically, though it will go on to gain support from the US in the years ahead. So, why is this crisis important? Well, it shows the fragility of old imperial powers in a new world order. It also highlights the growing influence of the United States and the Soviet Union in global conflicts, and it sets the stage for future Middle Eastern tensions. The Suez Crisis is a critical moment in the Cold War, and its repercussions are still felt in the region today. Alright, folks, that's all for today's deep dive into the Suez Crisis of 1956. I hope you've found it as fascinating as I have. If you want to dive even deeper into the topic, check out the links in the description for further reading. And of course, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more history content coming your way. Until next time, take care.